Good evening, my friends in the East Coast. Good morning to people in Japan. It's very early in the morning, but it's kind of maybe like 5 o'clock to those who live in the East Coast of the United States. I realized that there are those from the United States and Japan and Israel interested in my podcast. I welcome any listeners. So before I start my podcast, uh, I always say this, but please download my podcast. Also, follow me and listen to me. Um, so, my name is Hannah. Um, Hannah Klein. Welcome to my podcast. Hannah Klein's Time. I'd like to discuss various topics plainly without bias here. Once, one person spoke of the peace in the Middle East. That was quite a while ago. He was actually an Israeli. I was very impressed with his opinion. I cannot tell who this person was. However, I believe that there will be peace in the Middle East one day with Israel. I've also known of people whose ancestors are from Syrians, and today's topic is about Syria. Syrian citizens have been through horrific time because of the dictator Bashar al-Assad and other terrorist organizations. However, I have detested Bashar al-Assad for a long time, more than a decade. It was such a laughable moment when Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia. However, how can there be true peace in the Middle East, and what is actually going on in Syria? Today's guest has a vast knowledge on the Middle East, and I'd like to focus very much in Syria and have a dialogue with him today. So, now I'd like to introduce today's guest. His name is Dr. Josef Olmert. Dr. Olmert has been the director of the Government Press Office of Israel. Also, he was an advisor to the former Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. I'm sorry, pardon my pronunciation's really bad. During the Gulf War era. This is Bush father's era. I truly believe Bush father is a hero in many ways, and I truly love him as the president of the United States. Going back to Dr. Olmert's introduction, Dr. Olmert has been famous for being a peace negotiator. He's an expert on Syria. The last time I recorded, I heard a lot of interesting analysis on Bashar al-Assad regime and other questions on Syria. It is so unfortunate that our conversation was not properly recorded, but he kindly rearranged his time for my podcast, and I really appreciate it. So please welcome Dr. Josef Olmert.
All right, let's
Oh,
start.
good morning. Joseph, how are you?
I'm doing fine, looking forward.
Oh, yeah. I was really anxious, to see to like have this conversation again, really. And I'm really honored and I have I'm very grateful. But
Thank you very much. It's my honor, and I'm ready to start.
okay, the first question is that I I think there is like before talking about all these terrorist issues, I think that there is a root problem in Syria. Like, it's probably tragic condition. And could you explain from your perspective, on this issue?
Well, that's the key, and you put the nail on the head exactly in the right place. Because when we look at the Middle East in general, then we'll move on to Syria momentarily, we
Mm.
have a lot of failing states. I know that
Um,
there is a debate among scholars and commentators, and of course, policymakers. What exactly is the definition of failing state?
mm,
But I'm not in the business of getting into theoretical issues when the reality is very, very strong about what a failing state is in the Middle East. And Syria is an example of that. Why?
mm,
Because when you look back at the history of Syria since independence in 1946
mm,
until now,
okay.
who can even count the number of military coups d'etats, the number of political assassinations, the number of violent incidents within the country, and even though we talk about civil wars and we speak immediately about Lebanon as the example of a country prone with civil wars, Syria has had its civil wars as well, and not just the last one. So why does it show failing state?
Mm,
And here is where the problem is. The problem really is the inability of
mm,
the Syrian population, with all its diversity of ethnicities, of religions, of linguistic groups, to create a political community that will be ready to live together within one state according to a agreed set of rules, values, and ideologies.
mm,
And the only way in which a government
mm,
tried to enforce
mm,
its will over people was through violence, and therefore it led to counter-violence. And when there were periods of attempts to create some kind of parliamentary democracy, for example, from 1954 to 58, after the coup
oh,
d'etat of 1949, or from 61 to 63 after the failure of the Syrian-Egyptian unity, which I'll come
mm,
back in a minute, they failed because, democratically speaking, the Syrian people, with all its diversities, could not come to an agreement about the type of regime they want. So this is a failing state because the only way in order to keep the state going is by brute force. And the logic of using brute force for too long is that it doesn't work.
oh,
Because in the end of the day, those who are under the yoke of the regime rise up. And what happened in Syria, therefore, was not an exception. And there was a big debate about that after the civil war of 2011 onwards. And people said, look, it was a terrible conflict. Yeah, it was a real serious challenge to stability in Syria, but Bashar al-Assad survived. And I
mm,
was one of those, very few. I wrote an article in 2019. No, he didn't win. He lost. Syria is not in one state anymore.
mm,
This is a fiction. And
oh,
5 years later, we saw it happening. So look, Syria is a failing state.
mm,
And there were all kinds of attempts to create a regime that will be okay. Didn't work. This is now another attempt.
mm,
For the first time, an Islamic regime. I can already tell you now, it's not going to work. It is not going to
oh.
work, and don't be impressed. Do
Oh,
not be impressed.
the
Well,
Turkish
let me
backed
just say,
government, right?
just 1 second.
Mm,
Do not be impressed with what seems to be a relatively smooth transition of power. That's not
mm,
true. The media doesn't tell you the truth. There are terrible atrocities committed against non-Sunni Muslims, mostly the Alawis, the Ismailis, I mean the
ah,
so-called Shiis, that you don't even see terrible, terrible videos coming out. It's not about saying I'm for or against any of the groups in Syria. I'm just giving you the facts. And this is how it starts. The regime now is there. There is somebody, Ahmed Ashara al-Julani. He is a good-looking, tall, impressive fellow. He's dressed up in a Western style. He meets some people, makes statements, and it seems like, no, it's not. The basic fundamental issues are there, and it's just a question of time.
Hmm. I see. So, yeah, like he's Turkish back, right?
He is Turkish backed, but and then again, look, we have to
Yes.
understand it. Again, it seems like Turkey is the great winners. Yes, it may look like this, but Turkey
Hmm.
cannot really become the ruler of Syria like Iran failed to be and
Mhm.
Turkey will fail to be. The Syrians are Arabs and mostly Sunnis, but Arabs. The Turks are Turks. There is an history, there is a problem of past legacies of
Mhm.
relationship between Syria and Turkey,
Mhm.
and the Syrians will not accept Turkish domination for the long run. There may be an interest on the part of both sides now to show affinity and solidarity. Obviously, Shara would like to show that he is supported by Turkey, and this is like an umbrella of defense for him.
No.
But the Turks don't have the money to rehabilitate, to reconstruct Syria, which will be hundreds of billions of
Right.
dollars.
That's a big
And
country, yeah.
yeah, and they have a big issue in Syria, the Kurdish problem. There are over 2 million Kurdish people on the borders between Syria and Turkey. And that's a big problem. And that's a torrent on the side of Turkey in Turkey. That's a torrent on the side of Turkey in Iraq. It's going to be a torrent on the side of Turkey in Syria.
I've um I've I think spoken with Kurdish people in Turkey, and I know some people, some Kurdish people in Turkey, and I I realized that well they actually, update a lot of gruesome photos committed by Turkey. It's terrible. Like I don't
Yeah,
know, I don't know why it's like
it's very bad. Look, the most important situation right now, the most gruesome, is in the Alawi territory,
hmm,
where I don't even want to get into describing what you see on videos, which are authentic, by the way. It's terrible. You have to
yeah.
understand that, and that comes back to the initial question with which you started this, program. There was 700 years ago, a famous fatwa, religious ruling by Ibn Taymiyyah, the famous great Sunni scholar at Syria at that time, 700 years ago, that defined the Alawis as worse than the infidels.
So Eloise,
So you have to understand the attitude here towards the Alawis. It's like they are nothing, they are vermin. And when you look at videos
hmm,
during the Civil War, 2012, 2013, 2014 onwards,
hmm,
when people interviewed Alawis and
hmm,
they asked them, why do you support so much the regime,
hmm.
the Bashar Assad? They basically said, look, they are our defenders. They are us. If we are not in control, we shall be totally down under. And
Oh,
that's exactly what indicates a failing state.
hmm,
That the idea is that as a minority, you can't survive really democratically. You have to protect yourself by ruling other people. And then when they take over, you know what happens to you.
oh, I
But
see.
that's exactly the tragedy of Syria. And the Western media, with all these praising words now to how the transition is smooth, it is not.
Hmm.
And let alone, by the way, also another problem that you may ask about the Druze community in the south of Syria, on the borders
Yes,
between
yes,
Syria, Jordan, and Israel,
yes.
which is almost a problem not as big as the Alawi problem because their numbers are smaller. They are about 800,000 as opposed to the 2.5 million Alawis, but they are on the border with Israel and Jordan. It's therefore a very sensitive issue here. And the Druze of South Syria show all kinds of signals and make all kinds of noises about their fear of the new regime. And right now, the new regime basically is not based in the south of Syria. They're not in control there. So there is not really still overt big violence,
Hmm.
but the regime is not there. So again, I mean, all these indications are that the
Oh,
honeymoon, the
oh,
honeymoon is a short-lived one. Maybe like in life, how much time do we have for honeymoon as individuals? Well, it's a month, it's a year maybe, but then, we get into a regular life. So Syria is in a kind of a so-called honeymoon, but don't be fooled by this. It is not going to be quiet and peaceful.
Oh, I see. Well, uh, see, like I have known that, the United States support like Kurdish, like Kurds in Syria. And from the perspective that I understand. And is there like merit like in like geopolitics or diplomacy to support like Kurdish people in Syria? Because like, I'm interested because Kurdish people are very, very much, they want a nation, an independence, somewhere, I guess, like, and
They are a nation.
mm,
They want political independence. They are a nation.
hmm yeah.
Look, first of all, bear in mind something about the Kurds that, again, don't always people know outside of the Middle East. They are the largest ethnic group in the Middle
That's
East
true. Yeah.
without independence. And
Mm.
everybody talks about Palestinians, but nobody talks about the Kurds in that context. You have about 15 to 18 million Kurds in Turkey.
Oh, yes,
You
yes.
have about 8 million in Iran. You have about 8 million in Iraq, and you have over 2 million in Syria. So you have about 40 million. And they are all covering what they call Kurdistan, which is divided between these four countries, the borders.
Mm.
Now, the US wars in Iraq, let's start with Iraq,
Mm.
gave the Kurds for the first time in their modern history a
Mm.
measure of self-rule, virtual self-rule in the north. By the way, the Kurdish people in northern Iraq are in touch with me. They interview me regularly for magazine, whatever, and they are, yeah. But it is still formally part of Iraq.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes.
In Turkey, of course, we know, the doctrine that is still prevailing in Turkey, not exactly phrased the same way like it used to be in the past. It's the old Ataturk doctrine of one nation in Turkey, only the Turkish nation, and therefore no way that other ethnicities could claim any collective political rights. And then it brings us to Syria. In
Mm.
the past, even the Trump administration, but before in the Obama administration, they capitalized on Kurdish support to fight against ISIS.
Yes.
But there was no real political alliance between the
Oh.
Trump administration and before and Obama and later on the Biden administration with the Kurds of northern Syria.
Mm.
There was on the ground cooperation, but no formal political alliance, as opposed
Oh.
to Iraq, where there was no written alliance, but there were guarantees by the Trump administration that the Kurds will not be oppressed again. And when they declared their independence in the referendum, he betrayed them, he abandoned them. So, but at least there was some kind of understanding. There is no political commitment to the
Mm.
Kurds in Syria. So the
Oh.
Trump administration, when we talk about now, the Trump administration maintains its options open.
Oh, okay.
Now, the sense is that they will not like to see Turkish invasion to Syria in order to put down the Kurds.
Mm.
Now, they are not exactly saying it. There are all kinds of indications. For example, some senior members of the Trump administration, the new one, are very anti-Turkish, like Miss Tulsi Gabbard, who is going to be the director of national intelligence, which in the past made very pointed, strong anti-Turkish statements, and a lot of the Republican people in Congress for all kinds of reasons. But there is no guarantee or commitment from Trump. And that brings to the game, in that case, another player,
Mm.
Israel. Now, the expectation is that Israel would support Kurdish aspirations for self-rule or autonomy in
I.
northern Syria. Why not? The Kurds are not an enemy of Israel, not an enemy of the Jews, and the Kurds of Iraq have always been more friendly towards Israel. And in the past, there were connections between Israel and the Kurds of Iraq. But these connections were possible only when Iran, under the Shah,
Mm.
was
Oh.
also supporting the Kurds, and it enabled Israel and Iran to use the border with Iraq in order to support the Kurds. The Israelis cannot really do much for the Kurds of northern Syria. There's no border. It's far away from the Israeli border. And it's simply technically impossible. But the idea is that maybe the Israelis will use their friendly relationships with the Trump administration and with Congress in order to put pressure on this administration to prevent Turkish takeover of the Kurdish territories in northern Syria. That could be done.
Oh.
So again, remains to be seen. All this is like, fluid situation. I mean, there are talks, there are ideas, there are suggestions, there are great podcasts like yours. You ask me and I answer you. But on the ground right now, it is a stalemate in a way because the Turks are making noises. They
Mm.
are showing signs of possible aggression against the Kurds, but not really happening. So
Oh.
it is kind of wait and see situation.
Oh, I see. Oh. Like a lot of people in Iraq are really expecting, Kurdistan, see that. So, uh,
Yeah, but again, the tragedy, look, you have to understand the Kurds, there's a famous saying by the Kurds, our biggest ally is the mountain because they're like far away from central government, used to be in history. And now, of course, with technology and all that, the mountains are not a shelter anymore. But the tragedy really is that they are spread between four countries, Syria, as we said, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran.
Mm.
And none of these countries would like really to see an independent Kurdish state because it's like the domino falls in one country, it could
Mm.
affect immediately or
Mm.
have implications immediately on the neighboring countries where the Kurdish people there would like to demand the same right that they get, say, in Iraq or in Syria. The closest they are to some kind of actual self-rule is in Iraq,
Mm.
but as part of the Iraqi state.
Yes.
And formal independence, even in the case of Iraq, I don't see it happening. And
Oh.
that's a tragedy. Look, I have many Kurdish friends, and I've been around being interviewed by Kurds for years, and all this, and I always say to them, look, you need to hear the truth. The truth is that your geopolitical situation is not ideal. It's like what it
Oh.
is. You are divided between four countries, and I don't see, for example, any government in Turkey that is ready to accept anything like a real viable Kurdish independent state, either in Iraq or in Syria.
Oh.
So it is
I
that,
I might
yeah.
interrupt you, but Turkey, Erdogan is like has been, like a ruler for like decades, but is like Turkey, well, like does Turkey tend to like oppress like Kurdish people, like, throughout
Look,
history?
I don't want to get into Turkish politics. I mean, I don't want to, I can look.
Hmm.
The basic Ataturk doctrine was about the Kurds are mountainous Turks. They are not an ethnicity of
Oh,
Islam.
okay.
And there were bloody revolts in 1925, 1930, 1937, and then later on the PKK, the current Kurdish movement in the 1960s onwards. And how many people were killed in those rebellions as of 100 years back, 1925, when it was Sheikh Said, the famous leader, hundreds of thousands of people, and, a suppression of
Yeah,
Kurdish
well,
cultures, Kurdish literature, Kurdish language. Some interesting movies. I don't know if you ever watched the movie Yol from the
mhm,
early 1980s that talks about the plight of the Kurds in Turkey. Very moving and strong movie called the Yol. But, Erdogan on occasions tried to kind of make changes on the basis of the common Islamic heritage. Kurds are Sunni Muslims, most of them, almost all of them. There's some Shia sects,
sorry that
Ali,
I asked you this.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Ali Lai sect, which is more Shia, but very small, But no, look, there are facts in the Middle East that change all the time, and there are facts that never change. And
Mm.
one of those things that really don't change is that if the Kurds in Turkey are almost 20% of the population,
Well,
Turkey
that's
is
pretty
not
large. right?
I said 15 to 18 million or so. The Turks are not going to accept any type of actual Kurdish separation of one kind or another.
Yeah,
The
that's
most, you know what? Let's be idealistic. Let's be optimistic. Let's be visionary, okay? You and me. The most you can see happening in Turkey is that if Erdogan's party, the AK party, the AKP, will out of government, say in the next elections or whenever, and there will be the Republican the People's Party, the old Ataturk party will come back to power. They're also committed to this policy about the Kurds, but maybe they will be ready to have more kind of leeway economically to the Kurdish depressed areas in the southeast or leeway culturally, but that's it. Not
oh,
political, not political.
oh, I see. Well, see, like actually there has been like, people like discussing like Kurdish people in Japan, and also I actually re try to refrain from talking about them and just also stay away from them. But because they're like um yeah, like probably I should not say that. Anyway, I really, really, find it very interesting that, Kurdish people and Jewish people have like, good relationship. Kind
Oh,
of.
why not? Look, the Kurds don't have any problem with Israel. They are not Arabs. They don't have a border with Israel. By the way, Iran under the Shah was very friendly to Israel, and Turkey was friendly to Israel. There was a strategic alliance between Israel and Turkey for many years, because why would there be a conflict?
Oh, right, right,
But,
right.
but look, here is the problem. The Jews are a minority in the Middle East. They are the people of Israel, but altogether in the Middle East, they are a minority. The Kurds are a minority in the Middle East. There are Christian minorities as well in Iraq and Syria still, and in Lebanon, of
Yes.
course, and
Yeah.
even in Turkey some, or in Iran. And the Middle East is not just Muslim. The Middle East is a kaleidoscope ethnicities and religions. And it is natural for minority groups to feel the same against what seems to be a majority that wants to take over. But look, also, by the way, we talk about the Middle East. Let's put into the equation also the Arabic speaking countries of Northern Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya. They have a large, huge non-Arab minority, the Berbers, the Amazigh people.
Mhm.
And there are troubles there as well. I mean,
Yeah.
so there should be no surprise that there is this immediate affinity and sympathy.
Oh,
And yeah,
I see.
you should have seen during the war in Gaza, there were demonstrations in support of Israel in many parts of Europe conducted by Iranians and Kurds.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Oh, there were big, big
I mean,
demonstrations
Kurds
on
as well?
occasions, also in Canada and so on and so forth.
Mm.
Yeah, because look, the sense is that the Middle East is not only Sunni Muslim Arabic speaking. And the Kurds are the best example of that. Yes, they are Sunni Muslims, but their main source of collective identity is ethnic because the language is totally different. The Kurds are not Semites, I mean, they are not a Semitic people, and the
Right.
language is not Semitic. There are different dialects and accents and
Um,
whatever, but still the overall Kurdish. So why won't there be a solidarity or affinity between Israelis and Kurds? And by the way, don't forget also something else. There are in Israel about 150,000 Jews that came from Kurdistan, from Iraq and in
mhm.
Iran, mostly in Jerusalem, but not only. And so, you know, you have in Jerusalem Kurdish restaurants, Kurdish food. I mean, the football team, a famous football team in Jerusalem, is supported by many of these Kurdish Jews that are called the Kurds, of
Um,
Jerusalem. And so there are lots of connections here, even cultural. And to me, it seems natural. I know that some people
oh,
out
I
of the Middle
see.
East are kind of surprised. How can it be?
Oh,
But
I
let me
see.
make just one more quick comment on that. Look, the problem really is that we, from the outside of the Middle East, not we, but those who look at the Middle East from the outside, they are always falling victim to the sense that the Middle East is Islam, Arab, period. And there is a little problem with Israel. Let's just, and that's the exception.
That's
Many Israelis will tell you what? That Israel's problems are the rule, not the exception. Look at the Kurds,
mm,
look at other minorities, and you see that there is a general problem here. So it's a question of orientation also. How do you look at all this?
oh, I see. Well, see, going back to like Assad. See, Assad was saying that, he was cruel to the citizens, and after he fled, it was, what he did was like like became very obvious. Yeah, but he was saying that he was fighting against the terrorists, and I don't exactly understand who, he
He
mean.
fought this, look, he fought the Syrian people. He fought the Sunni Muslim people of Syria. And look, there was a civil war in Syria between 1976 to 1982,
Hmm.
a big one,
Hmm.
led by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, again, the Hafiz Assad regime.
Hmm.
That was put to an end in 1982, in February, March of 1982, in the city of Hama in central Syria, where 40,000 people were massacred by the regime. 2 years earlier, there was an attempt in October of 1980 on the life of Hafiz Assad. You know what they did, the regime? His brother, Rifat, who is still alive, by the way, he's almost 90 years old, in exile in Europe, billionaire. He was commander of one of the militias that supported the regime. They
No.
took over 1,000 inmates from the Palmyra jail,
Mhm.
forced them to dig trenches, shot them all, and buried them. So the sectarian nature of the conflict was so obvious. In 1979, the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists entered into the military academy in Aleppo, in Syria,
Mhm.
and killed only the Alawi officers, not
Oh.
the Sunni Muslim. They knew who was Alawi, who was not. And I can go on and on like that. It obviously was a sectarian civil war. So the same was in 2011. The names of the organizations that fought against Assad were different.
Hmm.
The Muslim Brotherhood as such were not, but groups that were affiliated with their ideology are.
Hmm.
And it was purely sectarian conflict because the regime was based mostly on the Alawi and other minority communities in
Oh.
Syria. Now, why won't he call it terrorist? Because he wanted to win some support in the West by claiming, as much as you support anti-terrorist, I am anti, because those terrorists like ISIS are against me. Of course, they were against him because they were Sunni Muslims and he was an Alawi.
Oh.
So, look, we have to, and that again and again, brings it to the problem of Western media and Western understanding of the Middle East. Because we in the West altogether are somehow, we are tired of sectarian conflicts. We try to
Hmm.
shy away from conflicts that are based on religion and ethnicity and all that. We don't like them. We
Hmm.
like to think that in our Western democracies, we can solve all these problems by dialogue, by
Yeah,
cooperation,
exactly. Yeah.
and we therefore don't want to accept that in some large parts of the world outside of us, that's what happens.
Hmm.
People like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, no
Yes.
more. Bashar Assad in Syria and others, they knew how to talk to Western public opinion. They knew how to present themselves in ways that seemed understandable to some people in the West. And
Hmm.
for Bashar Assad to say these are all terrorists, of course, they used terror activities against him because that was their only way to fight against him. They were oppressed, and
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but they enjoyed a huge amount of civil support from the people.
No.
And you saw it once the people heard about Assad fleeing, it was spontaneous joy in the streets. I mean, not everybody, but it was really spontaneous. All this now remains to be seen because the Sunni Arabs in Syria are about 60% of the population. 40% are not Sunnis or Arabs. The Kurds, the Druze, the Alawis, of course, the
Hmm.
Ismailis, the Turkmens. There are lots of Turkmens, I mean, Turkish origin people, as well. Maybe 35%, not 40%, but it's a large amount of people. So we'll see what happens. As I told you before, it all remains to be seen. The honeymoon looks okay. It will not last for long.
Well, yeah, I started to get the image of the Middle East actually, because it's kind of like even though you just just read in words, it's like it's not like like looking at the entire Middle East. So but so like this Ahmad al-Ashara, this, I think he's crazy. He's
No,
just,
no, I disagree with you. He is not crazy at all, and don't, with respect.
call him crazy, but
Yeah, well, no, don't call him crazy. I'll tell you why. Because once you call him crazy, you minimize and belittle a phenomenon which is much bigger than just one person.
yeah, that's
The
true.
fact is that look, as I explained before,
Mm.
now Syria is undergoing into a new stage in its history, the Islamic solution. As they say in Arabic, Islam al-Hal. Islam is the solution.
Yeah.
And he represents this alternative, like Morsi tried to do in Egypt before the Egyptian army threw him out,
Um,
And let's see what happens. Look, it happened in Iran and it still is on. After the revolution in 1979, 1980, people said, look, how long will it sustain itself, the regime? So, it has. So he personally may not be the nicest person in the world, and he is not. He is not. But he represents a phenomenon. The fact that now, after all this history of coup d'etats and counter coup d'etats, this regime, that regime in Syria,
mm,
now comes Islam. As
mm,
I said, Islam is the solution, Islam al-Hal, Arabic, and now we'll see. Okay. So it may seem crazy or not, but by saying crazy, you kind of minimize something which is much bigger.
um,
It's a phenomenon in the history of the Middle East, the Islamic solution. We'll see what happens.
oh.
You're watching. Now, you ask me, it's not going to work. But again, let's just start it.
Well, probably, it's well, Japan is often said like 98%, 99% Japanese, you know. But like um archaeological perspective, I actually, spoke with a famous professor from Kyushu University. He was, a teaching, lecturing on archaeology, and I was talking about the percentage of like how many Koreans were in Japan, like long time ago, because like Pakche, like thousands of years ago, came to Japan, fled to Japan, and Japan accepted many like Koreans. So like like it's a mixture of like Korean culture and some kind of Japanese culture that we have, and we don't know where we came from, but but I think that even though well, like there are minorities in Japan, like Okinawans, or those who are in like in Hokkaido, like Ainu people, like I think that we like in general, like we try, maybe if we try to ignore and say like we're all Japanese, that's it. But it's probably like uh you know uh we have to, like, when we look at the minorities, there are a lot of minorities in Japan. And, so uh it's probably, I don't know. Maybe the power balance, has like, settled down like years and years ago. But probably it's not, the Middle East is like somewhere
No,
else.
it's not. And I was waiting for you to say it's not the Middle East. Look, first of all, the numbers in Japan, I don't know enough about Japan. I mean, I was a guest on Japanese government way back and visited Japan, but I'm not claiming to be, an expert on Japan other than following very, very sympathetically some great Japanese soccer players who play now in England and are very good. I'm surprised to see them. I'm a soccer fanatic. Okay. But look, the numbers are, I don't know, less than 1% of the overall population, and they don't occupy particular territories like on the borders of Japan with other countries, and there is no religion involved.
Mm.
In the Middle East, there is religion. The
Yeah.
Alawis and the Druze, for example, their religions are secret. And
Mm.
they are divided within themselves into a small minority of the people who know about the religion and the rest of the people who are the commoners who just accept what the religious leadership tells them because of the persecution and all that over on religious grounds. So it's a different situation altogether. And the role of Islam in societies in the Middle East is, of course, so dominant and all that. So no, I would not make any comparisons here. And it is a temptation
Oh.
for political scientists, for scholars to, in a way, I'm not referring to you, but I'm saying that it is a temptation sometimes to simplify complicated issues in other parts of the world by trying to show that they are more or less like we have in our countries.
Oh.
That's not the case.
Oh.
But look at the Middle East.
Mm.
Shias versus Sunnis.
Mm.
Yemen, civil war,
Mm. Yeah,
Sunnis
that
versus
was
Shias. Where are
terrible.
the Houthis? The Houthis are the Zaydis, which is a Shia sect. Look at Lebanon, Hezbollah, the Shia, other communities. Look at
Mm.
Syria, the Alawis versus the Sunni Muslims. Look at Iraq,
Yeah.
Sunnis and Shias. And look at the troubles that Christians have had and still have in Egypt, the Copts, and so on and so forth. It's look at the Berbers in Morocco and all those countries versus the Arabs, or at least the problems that exist there, and they exist. So there's no question that ethnicity, religion, and language are the barriers in the Middle
Yeah,
East.
it is.
And I would say religion, ethnicity, and language in that order.
Mm. Yeah, I really felt that, we just cannot say like, Israeli people are just having troubles or something. You know, we also have problems, the same problems, I think. That and yeah, it's probably, it's not the same, maybe, because, ethnically it's different, but and we have like I guess that Japan is facing the common issue that we are different like some in a way that is there are people who are different, and also I guess that there are like more diversities because we see like half like black black American father and Japanese. I think that, I
You
believe
have
that.
the, you have the, you have diversity, but it is nothing like the diversity of the Middle East. And you are lucky that you are not like that. Feel lucky. I mean, I'm not getting into the troubles of any other country here. I'm not coming here to this great discussion with you to talk about what I'm not an expert on. But it is not the same. Trust me, it is not
Yeah,
the same.
it is not the same. Yeah.
Look, the Korean Peninsula is a huge problem. I understand, but it is not the same. It is not the same. And by the way, it's interesting, however, that maybe the problem that you have in the Korean Peninsula with this North Korea, the atomic program and all that, and the atomic
Yeah.
bomb and all this, I think it is a much bigger threat to world peace than, say, the Middle East. But even that is a problem because a lot of the literature about the Middle East says that the Middle East conflict is the number one threat to peace and stability in the world, in the entire world, which is doubtful. That's another story. China is not the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So, but let's not get into all that, because that
Yeah,
really.
that's true. But probably probably I'd like to ask if you, because you're now retired, uh probably have a lot of time to write something. Do you have like plans or to write
No.
like mini
How can I
lectures
have
or
right
essays?
to write something when I have podcasts with you and with other countries all the time? No, of course. I'm now putting together collection of stuff about Syria, and I will publish it as an ebook. I hope within the next 2 to 3 months. I have
Oh, that's
something else in mind later on during this year to put together a collection of essays on the Middle East situation from the perspective of Israeli outlook. By the way, towards minorities in the Middle East and all that. So these are the two immediate projects that I have that will be ebooks,
mm.
they will be very accessible, very simple, to get into for those who are interested,
Uh,
Uh,
is it in English
yeah,
or
of course,
in?
it will
Oh,
be in
wow, that's
English,
great.
and I
Oh,
will, of
that's
course,
very interesting.
publicize it, and but
Yeah.
the point really is that it's all very nice to say retired, but hey, I'm working very hard on all kinds of stuff. So people ask me, why do you work so hard? You're retired. I said, now that I'm retired, I have time to work,
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's what I was saying. Like,
yeah,
yeah, a lot of
but
time to work
look,
on something.
yeah,
It helps.
the Middle East situation is, of course, complicated, the Israeli situation, and I'm also preparing something about Israel itself. I'm very, of course,
Yeah.
interested in, also, I should say, concerned about aspects of the Israeli domestic situation and all that. So, there's a lot to be done. And over the weekend, we watch soccer. I'm a great soccer fanatic. I like soccer, And I need to
You
tell you
like soccer
something.
team in Japan?
No, but there is an Israeli player who plays in a team in Osaka.
Oh, that's cool.
And 60 years ago, Japan hardly played soccer, and now they are a powerhouse in soccer, So I
Yeah.
soccer is becoming like second only to baseball in terms of popularity. So it's very interesting. It shows something about Japanese people. They decide to do something, they do it. And they do
Oh.
it well. I need to tell you, when I was in Japan, it was an interesting visit because two Japanese not senior, they were, I think, medium level staffers of the foreign ministry. They hosted me, like they were guiding me and accompanying me on behalf of the ministry because they served in the embassy in Tel Aviv. So they knew me from Israel.
Oh, okay.
And it was a very interesting visit. I learned a lot about Japan. And what I'm trying to tell you is that sometimes we don't need to have this set collection of ideas about situations without seeing them for ourselves. And a lot of the problem that I find about the Middle East is that people talk about the Middle East from the outside without even knowing it,
Oh.
without setting foot in it, without visiting it, without really realizing it and all that. And they use terminologies to describe the Middle East that fit into the conventional wisdoms of Western thinking. Because if you use the same terminology, everybody will understand you in Denmark, in Canada, in God knows where at the same time. I'm just using examples, because it is the same kind of cultural milieu of Western democracy. So you need to visit places to see for yourself. And this visit in Japan was really very educational to me and very, very significant. I liked it.
Well, that's very nice of you
It's
to
not
say.
that I invite myself to another visit. Don't look at it like that. I'm just saying. No.
Yeah, like, yeah, well, that's true. But if you were to recommend about like Israel, what is like the best thing about Israel, you think? Or like what do you recommend about Israel?
Well, look, here is about Israel that something that is unique in the world, and maybe this is one of the reasons why Israel is so misunderstood, and to be honest, also looked suspiciously at and even hated by many people. They cannot understand something that is very significant about Israel. They don't understand what really Zionism is. Zionism is 3,000 years old ideology that the land of Israel, land of Zion, is the homeland of the Jews. And the fact that for all those years when the Jews were deported from their homeland, came back, but still were a minority there, oppressed by other regimes and all this, they still maintained the hope to come back to their homeland. And finally they did it.
Mhm.
That should have been that should have been
Mhm.
a lesson to the entire world about hope,
Mm.
about resilience, about the role of history and belief,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
the idea that nothing is impossible if you want it so badly.
Well,
And,
yeah.
I hear people say, the Jews are colonial settlers in
Yeah,
Israel. I
that's
mean,
a
that's
problem.
so idiotic. I was in New Zealand,
Mm.
in Australia. I
Yeah.
mean, two most classic examples of colonization. I
Yes.
mean, plus 100 years ago, nobody even knew that there were countries like that. And then
Yeah.
some British inmates were deported to the
Yeah,
farthest
I know.
place. And they tell me in a university in New Zealand, in Christchurch, you are a colonialist settler.
Hmm.
I mean, the Jews are colonialists in Jerusalem, you know. So what's so good about Israel is the idea that despite all the trepidation, despite all the persecutions, despite all the hatred, the strength of hope and belief prevailed. And Israel
Yeah.
exists, and Israel is strong, and Israel is powerful. So that's the best thing about Israel. Everything is great? No. Everything is great in Japan? No. Most things are, some are not. Everything is great in Israel? No. Most things are, some are not. For example, our political system is problematic. There are problems within religious groups, you know, about the level of tolerance towards each other. I mean, within the Jewish religion, and there may be other issues. But altogether, Israel is a story of success.
Yeah,
It's a
I
story of
really,
success.
really felt that when I was, I had known Jewish people when I was very little. He was a Pennsylvania State University professor, and I was just, doing exchanging letters, and I've also visited him, in Hawaii after, they retired, they moved to Hawaii, so like I visit them frequently in Hawaii. But after, I I learned about Israel, and when I was really like 10 or 9 years old, I really felt that like Israel was like a really special country.
In many ways, it is. Despite all the war, the Israeli economy is about 18 or something in the world,
Yeah.
in absolute terms. The scientific achievement, the technological achievement, one of the Israeli hospitals is number 9 best in the world.
Yes.
Three Israeli universities are among the 100 best universities in the world. The per capita number of academic title holders in Israel is number 1 or 2 in the world, and so on and so forth. Look, but there is anti-Semitism. Look, there is anti-Semitism. There is terrible, terrible plague called anti-Semitism that accompanies us from day one of our history because of the uniqueness of the overall Jewish experience. And that's terrible, you know. And that's terrible. And that is something that, I'll tell you something about that, but always you hear from Israelis. One of the things that really bothers me is that you might argue, you know what, there were some years of peace and quiet, some troubles along the border between Israel and Gaza. Okay, so there was troubles. The Hamas did this, Israel did
Yeah,
that,
yeah, 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 yeah.
But there were some other troubles, maybe along other situations. Iran threatens Israel, Israel threatens back, but nothing happens. Then came the 7th of October, the terrible atrocities.
Yes.
And a new generation of young Israelis will already grow up on the basis of that. So we lost another generation. The cycle, therefore, of hostility,
Yeah.
hatred, and counter-hatred is there to continue for at least another generation.
Yeah.
So you say to yourself, look, at my age, I can look at it like I'm looking back at life and, not too much to look ahead. I say, look, I mean, that's what it is. Now
Mm,
it's going to be my children's problem and my grandchildren. And there is no end to that. And that's really is this one thing that people don't always understand about this conflict. The fact that it's becoming almost like a reality of life, like what you expect to see.
mm,
And even if it doesn't happen for a few years, you say to yourself, but when will it happen again?
mm,
I'm asked sometimes to review books that people
mm,
write. So there was a book that was sent to me 7, 8 years ago about Lebanon, not Israel,
mm.
by a Lebanese scholar who moved to one of the Gulf countries to be a professor. I can't remember whether UAE or Qatar, one of them. And he made the field research in Lebanon back. He went back to Lebanon to make field research about how the Lebanese think about Lebanon themselves in view of all the conflicts. And the sad, tragic conclusion of the book was the Lebanese always live in the shadow of a civil war, either the one that happened or the one that is going to happen.
Oh,
And it is therefore a society that is almost always on the brink. And that's the kind of stuff that happens in other countries of the Middle East, not just in Israel, that makes this area so volatile, so unstable, so problematic. The sense that conflict is normal
Mm.
and the opposite of it is abnormal. So to
Mm.
even wish for the opposite of it may look to some people like, are you out of your mind? I mean, don't you see what is happening? And don't you see what's around? And how can you even think about those terms?
Mm.
And that's something that we need to find a way to deal with also in the way we teach about the Middle East.
Mm.
Rather than delving immediately into this particular conflict or that particular conflict, try to understand there are different peoples, different societies with different historic legacies. How do we create a situation whereby
Mm.
we look at other people and see that they are different,
Mm.
but not worse or inferior to us?
Yeah.
How to live with difference and diversity. So it brings it back to what you asked me about Syria. That's the test now of Syria.
Mm.
And the early months of the new regime or the early weeks are not giving us a good signal. I'm telling you that. You
No.
have to see what happens with Alawis now. And it's not about
Mm.
me having sympathy with the Alawis or antipathy. It's just, I'll tell you what I see.
Mm. Yeah.
And you see hundreds of young people, Alawis in a village, being forced to lie on the ground and make sounds like dogs because they refer to like dogs
Mm.
by the majority. And dog is not a favorite animal in the Middle East.
Mm.
So you have to understand here the connection. So I'm not optimistic, really. I'm not, and I
Yeah,
wish I
that's
was.
very true, but I'm glad that you told me about Zionism because that's another, political ideology. I discussed with, the Dr. Fearhybrid, because, I believe that, Zionism is a wonderful ideology. And also I wonder, it's a political ideology or it's, what kind of ideology it
It's
is.
history. It's history.
Yeah.
That history of the Jewish people. When the Jews were exiled first to
Mm.
Babylonia, 2,500 years back,
Yes.
there was this famous poem, there we sat on the rivers of Babylonia, crying, remembering Zion.
Mm.
And
Ah.
so they went back. And then the famous poet Yehuda Halevi in Spain in the 11th century,
Mm.
I'm here, but my heart is there. And he then moved to the land of Israel and died there. And then in between all these attempts by Jews to come back to their homeland, sometimes led by false messiahs and so on and so forth.
Mm.
Now, the political movement called Zionism is therefore a political expression of an centuries old sentiment,
Oh.
historic feeling, whatever that you would put into that. I mean, you know, the Jews end up big meals with what they call Shira Ma'alot, the Song of Ascendancy.
Mm.
And it says, how joyful we are if God will bring us back to Zion. Then we
Yeah.
shall smile and we shall say, what a miracle happened to us. When you marry in a Jewish wedding, you break the glass. Why? To
Yeah.
commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, I
Mm.
can go on and on like this. I mean, what other nation is such long-standing connection to a particular piece of land as the Jews have to Zion? So Zionism, even
Wow.
the name means what? The land.
Oh.
Now, and by the way, just to end up with this, politically speaking,
Mhm.
both Zionism as a political movement and Arab nationalism grew up at the same time, late 19th century.
Oh, I see.
Because late 19th century, when nationalism creeping into the Middle East from Europe,
Mm.
on the one hand, so that aroused Arab nationalism against the Turks, the Ottomans,
Yes.
and the huge growth of anti-Semitism drove Jews towards Zionism. And by the way, even before Herzl, there already were people that were considered to be Zionists. And one of them was a former American president. The second president of the US, George Adams, he was a Zionist. He
Wow.
wrote a letter he wrote a letter in 1819, 1819, to a Jewish leader in upstate New York whose name was Mordechai Emanuel Noach, who was also crypto-Zionist. And he wrote to him, "My desire is to have a legion of 100,000 Jews coming to Judea to liberate their homeland."
Well, it's a wonderful, history that you told me. And actually, like, I was going, I wanted to ask you about Zionism, but, it was like, it's about Syria. And, it's like,
Oh, no, look,
I really appreciate
it's not a taboo subject to talk about Zionism. I'm proud to talk about that. I mean, why won't I? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate, you sharing, actually, Zionism. So, yeah, I guess the question is about it. And I really felt when you look very like, like you're like, writing simple things, but like when I saw your video clip, I thought that, it was something else.
Well, look, I don't, I'm not, there's nothing, something else. I'm ordinary person. I'm
I
ordinary
know, sorry.
person, but I'm old enough, but unfortunately or not, I'm old enough to remember and go back and all that. And now, I say to my children, to my daughters, I have three great daughters and 8 grandchildren, I say to other people, friends, the students that I'm
Hmm?
mentoring here at the University of South Carolina. As a matter of fact, soon enough, I'm going to leave here to a march that we have today to commemorate the Holocaust, the International
Uh,
Day of the
oh,
Holocaust
yes.
remembers. Yeah.
Yes.
So I keep saying to them, and not always it plays well with them, but that's exactly the problem. I say to them, so
Hmm.
you are confronting a lot of anti-Semitism now, a lot of hatred. Nothing new about that, and you have to realize that it's been around and apparently it's going to be. So some of them say, well, that's what it is. So we understand. And some of them say to me, but that's exactly why it is so depressing because it goes on and on and on.
Hmm.
So, that's the reality of being Jewish, on the one hand, realizing that we have been targeted for over 2,000 years,
That's terrible.
for
Yeah.
the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
but at the same time that we survived it and we flourished
Yes.
back. So
Yes.
there are those who look at that side of it, we survived it, flourished back, and there are those who look at the other side and say, but why are we in this situation? So that's part of the overall Jewish experience in our world, which not always people outside of Israel or outside of the Jewish world realize about the Jews, and therefore also about what could explain some of the behaviors of Israeli governments, which you can criticize also, but you can still criticize while understanding the context, the
Hmm.
contextual perspective, which is always historical.
Hmm.
And the famous saying by this American philosopher Santayana, if you don't remember history, you are doomed to relive it.
Hmm.
And we remember history.
Yeah.
And, in many ways, Japanese remember history, and therefore it also expresses a lot of Japan of today. It
Yes.
all leads to,
Yeah, actually, I wrote a book about Japanese history and I want to revise it. And after revising it, probably I would like to send it. Ask
thank
for
you. That will
advice.
be interesting, I'm sure. Yeah, that will be interesting. Yep.
Yeah, that would be very grateful. But I guess that it's about probably time that probably you have something to do, like it's like 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning now, so but you're a very active person and like so yeah, I have to learn from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
but
Really.
I have felt that, after listening to your mini clips that, probably like, it's probably the Middle East is something different that, than, I see. I really felt that.
But that's what makes our world so interesting, but also so dangerous, that we are really different from each other, and the ability to coexist when you have so many differences, that's basically
Um,
is the test of history.
Yeah.
And the Middle East is one of those examples, and we need to understand it. But look, this is what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah,
It
but
is what it is.
yes. But yeah, it was very interesting, and also I always learn a lot from you. And I but the last time, I'm sorry. I just don't know what to say, but thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you.
for your
Thank you.
time. And I really hope that, when you have time, like you come back to this podcast and, discuss something else.
That depends on you. If you will care to invite me, I will come back.
Yes, please.
Thank
And
you
thank
very
you so
much.
much.
Have a nice
Yeah.
week and
And
enjoy
yeah.
it. You do a great job. Keep doing the good job you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
so
Thank
have
you.
a
Bye
good
bye.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye. I'm really thankful that Dr. Olmert, Joseph, rearranged the date. And today, finally, I recorded the conversation. It was just, I was going crazy, and just screwed up things, that kind of thing, Like Joseph was like, "What?" The last time, like, "Are you sure that it disappeared?" Like, something like that. But I'm sorry. It was so terrible. Yeah, and um, the last time on the 29th of December, I was like in the middle of the real bad, like cold, but I really, really wanted to do the interview, and I just didn't talk about this cold, and I just tried to interview, and it just went really bad. But actually, what he told me was very interesting, and it goes back to when I actually, heard his kind of lecture, mini lecture, but, it was very, very interesting to me because it's not like what the outsiders, like those who don't live in the region, like including myself, see, the Middle East. I felt that, there is some kind of misunderstandings, and that's one of the reasons why, like we are actually troubling, Israel, or maybe other nations as well in the Middle East, and the media, as the Joseph, told me it's a disaster. Yeah, it is a disaster, indeed. And yes, it is a disaster, and at the same time, it's the textbook that that the Japanese Minister of Education provides that usually do not describe what is really going on. And finally, I was actually very, very pleased. What is great about Israel, he answered me about Zionism. And actually, that was something that I really, really wanted to hear. And, I didn't expect to hear, Zionism from him, but it was very nice of him to talk about it because, for Jewish people, it's a homeland. The Israel is the heart of them. Okay? We cannot take away those hearts from them, as we don't want to lose our house. The same thing. And I just do not think that it's appropriate to call them occupiers, because it used to be their homeland all the time, 3,000 years. They were, they dispersed. I know, some, I should say, like Jewish people from the Middle East, but there have been tragedies for Jewish people, and then they overcame the I have to say difficulties or persecutions, anything, and they are thriving in the state of Israel. And I really believe, this is not about politics, but I really truly believe in the future of Israel. Maybe in the next thousands of years. And I'm pleased that, Israel now has been back to the homeland, and there are a lot of people. And, well, I have to say this. Well, just yesterday, 744 days after October 7th, finally 4 hostages in Gaza came home. It was such a pleasurable moment to see them home. The female IDF soldiers, coming home to their loving families. I hope and pray that all the hostages come home. And as I said, I will keep talking about this and reminding every single one of you of this in every episode on my podcast until they come home. And then what will I do? I will talk about Israel. And it's a kind of mystery to me. And once I asked my Jewish friend, I told my opinion about Judaism and why I am attracted to the religion and also the state of Israel at the same time, and Zionism. And then she was saying, maybe sometime ago, maybe I was Jewish or something, I felt that, I was maybe, I had known a lot of Jewish people in the past. And, I don't know. But, Israel is a very special place for me since my childhood, and nobody told me about it, and actually I just started to think about it that way. And also I have read about